On a day like today, I suddenly realized that in the future, making these videos every year is going to be brutal. Aegis dynamics. We're saving the best for last, and Aegis Dynamics is right up there at the end of the show. So big, in fact, that they need 2 expo halls to contain all their ships. Aegis was something of a catch-all for a lot of ships in Star Citizen, and they've got a lot of really great ships. This one here, the Gladdy, is supposed to be one of the best dogfighting ships in the current meta of the game. A lot of people have told me that this is a really great ship. I debated recently when I unlocked the ability to buy the Pirate Gladius. I debated actually getting one, but ultimately pulled away from it. The Reclaimer, a beauty, an absolute beauty. Another great starship. Unfortunately, in the current game, a dead starship. Salvage, not in the game. Salvage has had multiple opportunities to become functional in the game. It has been on the pipeline and on the roadmap so many times and has never materialized. It still has not materialized, and fingers crossed it will, but since it is not something that is prominent in Squadron 42, it may continue to get the old bump until it is done. But the Reclaimer itself, it has had some interesting moments in the past. Now, you may remember the footage in the upper right from well over a year ago. This is using the Reclaimer to claim bounties. This is from the Bounty Claimer video from March of 2018. And yeah, using the Reclaimer to complete Tier 1 bounty missions. So much fun when we had control of all the guns on the ship. Unfortunately, currently, the Reclaimer, once again, has some serious issues. We can get to that in a future video, but the future of the Reclaimer is probably going to be pretty strong, but that depends on a lot of scheduling and other shit. The Vanguard. The Vanguard is a difficult ship because it is a ship that has had a long and difficult history. Most certainly, if you watch this channel, you'll know that recently I picked up the Vanguard again. I got it through, my buyback, and I've been trying it out with entirely unified weaponry, and to be perfectly honest, I do enjoy it. Now, when I say unified weaponry, it means that basically I'm using all the guns of the same type, so same projectile velocity, if you will, and so that kind of gives you just the one aiming pip. And for me, when I was doing these videos, it was very, very, very enjoyable to use the Vanguard again. I still believe that there are issues with the Vanguard, but in the current version of Star Citizen, with the limitations on travel that are placed on many of the lighter fighters and range, that coupled with the fact that the Vanguard allows you to carry armor, it allows you to carry weapons. Well, eventually, there's still some kinks to be worked out there. The Vanguard, I think, has finally found its niche. That, along with the fixes that CIG has given it along the way, and possibly I think that there could be a couple more things that could be tweaked on the Vanguard, but ultimately, the Vanguard, I think, has really taken its place as not a great fighter, not a showstopper, not a world ender, but a solid fighter. And something that, even though it may not be the best dogfighter nor the most maneuverable, when you think about the realities of what you're going to have to deal with in Star Citizen, including travel time, equipment carrying, all of these things, the Vanguard starts to become a much more attractive option. You have to remember that there isn't, CIG is not required to produce a perfect fighter every time they produce a fighter. What I would argue frequently in many of my episodes is that they should produce a fighter that is reasonable within the confines of the game. And the Vanguard, I think, has kind of stuck a toe across that finish line. I feel there's a little bit more room for improvement, but overall, I honestly think that the Vanguard is solid. You just gotta make sure to buy that big old fixed gun to stick underneath and get rid of the Gatling gun, because the Gatling gun, having mixed weaponry is kind of trash, but when you have unified weaponry on the Vanguard, it gets pretty tasty. It gets pretty tasty, I'll say that. The Retaliator. Now, the Retaliator is, of course, the Aegis heavy bomber, and apart from that, it also has another role within Star Citizen, which is the comedy generator. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, going all the way back to the earliest days of Star Citizen, before there was even an arena commander, before there was even, I think, a hangar module. You have to remember that one of the first big ships that was sold in Star Citizen was the Idris, though the Idris came with a very big price tag. And of course, everyone who bought an Idris thought automatically that, I've just purchased the I win button for Star Citizen. I can carry fighters, I have a railgun, so clearly I can destroy everything in the game. And the Retaliator sold like hotcakes to players who maybe weren't going to go all the way to buying an Idris, but wanted something that could challenge an Idris. And then the internet forum debates and the jousting began. Which one would come out on top? Would it be the Idris or the Retaliator? And endless hours of rock, paper, scissors style arguments unfolded on the Star Citizen forums, to the enjoyment of the rest of us who were smirking because so many people were discussing the finer points of strategy in a game that no one had played yet. Now, ultimately, the Retaliator has not, I think, realized its full potential. There are some issues with the cockpit and the ginormous radar screen that sticks out in the front of the cockpit, and there are other lingering issues with the interior, though the tactical usability of a ship like this. I mean, when I talked previously about the bounty claimer and things like that, you have to remember that one of the biggest kind of checks to the power of those big ships, the Hammerheads, the Idrises, and the Javelins potentially, is a ship like this, a big heavy bomber that can spam torpedoes at a target like that, not on its own, but as part of a unified, combat unit. The Retaliator could indeed be something to maybe be a little bit afraid of in large groups if you own a big ship like that. So there is some strong potential with a ship like this. The Idris. Now, of course, we've spoken about the Retaliator. Now we will speak about the Idris. The Idris is, or was, at one point, the final word in capital ships, the only word in player purchasable capital ships for a little while in the early days of Star Citizen. I think it was 2015, 2014, possibly, question mark, when we got the Javelin the first time around, and that was the destroyer, and this was still the Corvette, though ultimately it would upsize to a frigate. So the players who purchased this as a Corvette would find out that their Corvette had now become a much larger ship, a frigate. And the reasoning behind that is it's a frequent problem with the UK office, and they get ships and they end up making them bigger. At one point, the Carrack was getting enormous. They have the Orion. The Orion has become enormous. And I almost want to think it's almost a little bit of kind of, I don't know if you've ever remember, kind of building a base in Minecraft way back in the day. Or if you're still playing, I don't know, but you kind of have a perfect idea of what your base is going to be in your head, but then once you start building it and you have to start laying out all the redstone circuitry and all that stuff like that, you go, oh my god, I got to build this place so much bigger than I initially thought. And I think that in a weird way, that's kind of a metaphor for what happened with the Idris and some of the other ships, is that, by the time the UK had gotten to the point of actually practically building that ship, they kind of went, oh man, we're going to need so much more space to do this, to do that, and do the other thing as well. And it just ballooned. And that's how we got there. And that's eventually how we also got the Polaris, because the Polaris filled that now vacant Corvette slot. Ultimately, is the Idris a good ship? because there's a substantial price tag attached to it. I think that while the Kraken has somewhat diminished slightly the demand for an Idris in terms of logistics and carrying other ships into combat, to a certain degree, yes, but also I think because of the fact that the Idris itself is a direct combat vessel, I would say that it fills a different niche than the Kraken does. So while they do have some similar capabilities, they're not the same ship. They're not intended for the same role. I mean, I think you could say the Kraken is more intended for the classic carrier role, sort of that World War II Battle of Midway style thing where the carriers remain distant and send their fighters over to do their work for them. Whereas the Idrises they can bring a fighter or fighters along with them while they engage in that direct combat. I think that is the difference. That is, kind of how you would separate those two things. Ultimately, I think, the Idris is going to be a powerhouse in terms of direct combat. It is going to be a force that people are going to have to reckon with in the Star Citizen universe. I think that it is going to prove itself to be a very capable and dangerous opponent in the Star Citizen universe. However, I would deeply caution players who are purchasing this for solo flight to consider that it may not end up being viable as a solo piloted ship. You may technically be able to fly the ship, but I caution players about this all the time. As CIG stated, yes, you can fly the ship by yourself. You can maneuver the ship by yourself. You can get it from point A to point B by yourself. But relying on just AI crew members and server blades and just saying, well, it's going to be a one-man army, we don't know. There could be a lot of finesse involved in handling a complicated machine like this. So it's not a bad idea. If you're purchasing an Idris and you have an organization of people who are like, I would love to crew on your Idris, then it sounds like a great idea. But if you're going out there and you're saying, I am not going to join an org, I'm going to play by myself, but I'm going to take the Idris out and I am going to destroy with it and I'm going to defeat everybody with it, I would be very, very conscious or very, very cautious about the fact that it may not technically be possible to do that in a way that is meaningful, and you may just be ending up throwing a very expensive free kill to people. So it's not wrong to be ambitious, but being ambitious and smart, being ambitious and cognizant of the dangers that are out there, I think is a better place to be. So it's not a bad idea to bring a few people with you. The Javelin. The big boy, the big daddy, the destroyer of worlds. Once again, everything that I just said about the Idris, true of the Javelin as well. Though I want to add some stuff to the Javelin. As the big ship, its array of guns, its torpedo launchers, which sometimes people forget about, its landing pad, its giant expansiveness. It's the big one. It's the biggest of the big right now that you can purchase. It is the last word in capital ship combat currently in terms of just size and strength, and it is obviously going to be a powerhouse in the Star Citizen universe. And beyond that, I feel that a ship like this existing doesn't merely state that, if you want to be good in PvP, your org's got to have one of these or you're nothing. I once again, retaliators, we don't know that, but I think that what this kind of signals for the future is that there are going to be combat missions and content for people who own ships like this, or for people who crew on ships like this, who want this type of lifestyle in the Star Citizen universe. It may be difficult, it may be a while off. Like the Idris, this is once again locked behind the Squadron 42 veil and unlikely to be released until Squadron 42 is released. That's also one of the reasons why you will hear people like myself often say, once we can get Squadron 42 out of the way. Until Squadron 42 comes out, this ship and the Idris will not be released to the community. And it's entirely possible that, for the most part, both the Javelin and the Idris are very, very close to completed. You may remember a video from some time ago. Now, this video goes all the way back to April in 2017. Yes. This was from the old ATV, and this was featuring the Javelin. Now, this isn't the usual video that CIG shows, you know, when they would kind of do these videos and show beauty shots of a work in progress, where they would show a couple of rooms and you'd see maybe some stuff that wasn't quite complete. This is the Javelin. And this was a 3-minute long video that featured multiple interiors, all kinds of different sets, different locations within the ship. Not just the bridge, it goes beyond that. And you keep thinking that it's going to, you know, click off and then it's going to go back to, you know, talking heads telling you about Star Citizen. No, it just keeps on going on and on and on. And this is kind of where a lot of people started. I mean, they were loving it. They love the interiors of the ship and they love how cool it all looks, but they were also kind of getting a little bit, you know, well, why don't we have this in the game? The reason why we don't have this in the game is there's currently nothing in the game that can accommodate this in terms of landing sites and whatnot. We know the recent rules that were added to the game, which for some reason some people still defend these flight rules about large ships not being able to land on planets, though clearly we are dealing with a civilization that has mastered gravity. But there really is nothing for this ship to do in the current universe, so I can understand it to a certain degree, but at the same time, you know, if it's done, I mean, certainly we can upsize one landing pad on Port Olisar to accommodate this ship and let people go out and fly it around and have fun with it in some, you know, in some respect. Ultimately, though, the Javelin, for those of you who are out there who are networked with a large group of friends who want this large style naval gameplay, the Javelin does signal that there is going to be an outlet for you in the game for that type of thing. It's probably going to be a very expensive ship to maintain. There are people out there who feel that if you use a ship like this for combat missions, that it shouldn't realize a profit, which to me doesn't make sense. I mean, if you're thinking from the point of view of a contractor working for the military, you're not a non-profit organization. You're doing this to make money, and so obviously anybody who would be operating in this capacity within the UEE, they wouldn't do it if there wasn't a profit in it. So ultimately, I feel that this is going to kind of signal not what I think is going to be the end word in terms of money making in Star Citizen. I think it's going to be something that entails a lot of responsibility, a lot of hard work on the part of the owner and the crew to maintain and keep this ship, you know, capable of fulfilling its mission profile. But if they can, then I do believe that there is going to be some profit to be had. To what degree? We'll have to wait and see. The Sabre. Now, the Sabre is a ship that I remember quite well because when this ship was revealed at, I think it was the Citizen Con in the UK, the previous Citizen Con in the UK, it was I was away on a trip when this ship was released. I actually bought this using a cell phone at the time. Yeah. That's kind of how I remember the ship. It was the ship that I bought on a cell phone. But while initially it was very, very strong in Arena Commander and it was a pretty potent ship, usually ships that are just freshly sold tend to do quite well in combat. Strangely enough. Wonder if there's a connection. Well, the Sabre itself is a stealth fighter. It is not simply Aegis's answer to the Super Hornet. It is a slightly different animal. A little bit less armament, but it is a ship that is a bespoke stealth fighter. It is built to be a stealth fighter, not a fighter that has been adapted to have stealth characteristics. So that was initially supposed to make it a lot stealthier. And initially, I viewed it very positively, though a lot of these mechanics have really not manifested themselves in a meaningful way in the Star Citizen universe, to my experience. And ultimately, it was a ship that as fighters have kind of waned with me, I have kind of moved on from this ship. And ultimately, it feels like kind of a cool idea, something that obviously should probably exist in the Star Citizen universe, but for me personally, it never really clicked fully. I did like the looks of it, though. I do have some differences with some parts of the ship. Ultimately, I think that it's going to be a pretty good fighter. I don't think it's ever going to be a bad fighter, but when you look at the realities of dealing with traveling in between planets and possibly in the future traveling in between star systems, and the limitations that fighters have in this regard, unless you have a friend with an Idris or a Javelin or a Kraken who can kind of provide you that conveyance to those locations, it may prove to be a little bit too much of a headache to get from one place to another. And that's kind of where something like the Vanguard kind of really shows its strengths. And something like this, maybe not so much. Now, I think that ultimately in dogfighting versus a Vanguard, this is going to prove to be a very strong opponent and a very challenging opponent at the very least. And I don't think that if you are going for that dogfighting style of gameplay, I don't think that you are going to end up being disappointed with the performance of this ship. It's just that currently, I don't know. There's a part of me that kind of wants to give it another shot right now, and I may end up doing that just to kind of, just pick it back up, fly it around for a while, and then basically trade it in and play with something else for a while, as many of us do. But it's never been something that really clicked with me. However, with you, it may be a different story, and you have to remember that it's not just about my opinion. Your opinion counts too. Everybody's opinion to a certain degree, except for, certain people out there who imagine conversations with Star Citizen developers and stuff like that. But I think that ultimately it is going to be a decent fighter, and so it is one of those occasions where I can say it's not really my cup of tea, but I don't think that it will ever prove to be money misspent. The Hammerhead. Now, the Hammerhead is, of course, Aegis's gunboat. It is, I would say, a light, very, very light corvette. I believe that is how it is designated within the game currently. It is not meant to be a capital ship that brawls with other capital ships. It is instead intended to be a almost capital ship that pushes away all the other, small to medium-sized fighters that may be harassing a group of larger ships. It is meant to either lead a small detachment of fighters into combat, as CIG has told us, or it is meant to protect larger fleet assets from attacks from smaller ships, torpedo bombers, that sort of thing. Now, I can say this, having flown this ship in combat so many times, having flown it around in the universe for so many hours, owning it, I have mixed feelings about the Hammerhead. Now, that is not to say that the Hammerhead is a bad ship. There are many very, very good things about the Hammerhead, and I think that ultimately the Hammerhead is going to prove to be a very solid ship to own in the PU, though I think that, in all honesty, for me, the Hammerhead may in fact end up being recycled into the next ship that I'm going to show on this video, because I don't feel that it fits me as much as I would like to, or as much as I would like it to, even though, you know, just keeping this ship, it's currently flyable, it's decent enough, and hopefully in the future, as, you know, server-side object container streaming comes in and we're able to do new, much broader missions that may include content designed around ships like this, or scaled in difficulty and rewards for ships like this, that may prove to be a bit of you know, in the short term, a bad decision. I think that ultimately I am going to get rid of it. But for those of you who are looking to defend the fleet, or who are looking to be kind of like the hammer behind a smaller fighter and bomber detachment, this could be a very excellent ship. The Underside Cockpit is a bit of a gripe that I have with this ship. I'm not an enormous fan of it, though the downward view when you're trying to land it in the first person is a godsend. Another thing that that really kind of still bothers me, even though up in the front where the airlock is, you can find places where you could theoretically store armor or spacesuits or things like that, though that is not currently functional in the game. This ship still is entirely devoid of places to store weapons, right? You have like a barracks inside the ship for crew members, and there are many empty spaces on the wall where they're just padding, where someone could have just gone in and just glued in weapon racks on the wall and completely solved that problem. But they didn't do it. And this kind of illustrates one of the weaknesses of CIG's style of game development, which is we kind of show you what we want to show you, but we don't show you everything, is that any number of comments from the community earlier in the stage of building this ship would have caught on to that error, and it is an error, and would have said, hey, you know, just put some weapon racks in the wall. But by the time the ship was released, it was considered done. It was off the roadmap. They weren't going to send it back to art and say, oh, by the way, put in weapon racks. They're on a very tight production schedule. So ultimately, by the time that error was apparent, it had not been, you know, it was past the point of no return, unless we get to a point somewhere in the future where CIG is either forced or willing or needs to take the ship back into the pipeline to make some changes to it, that we may see a change like that manifest. And ultimately, I think that we will, but it is not something that we are going to see any point in the future. So if you have to store numerous weapons or armor on this ship, you're pretty much just going to be throwing them on the floor for the time being. The Nautilus. The Nautilus, I think, ultimately is where this is kind of my finish line. Since the ship was originally sold in concept earlier this year, I have warmed to the idea of this ship immeasurably, especially in contrast to the Hammerhead. And I've often struggled with this and the Polaris, one versus the other, but I think that ultimately this would be the better match for me personally. While having the hangar bay of the Polaris certainly may come in handy, I have to kind of acknowledge the fact that as a pirate, you're probably not going to want to use a ship that is entirely as visible as something like the Polaris. And the idea of the mines that this ship can lay, the traps that it can lay, the area denial, things like that, to me, it feels like a better match for my personal situation. And when we're talking about capital ships, you really do have to think about your personal situation in the future of the game and what is going to match up with that. And for me, I believe the Nautilus is that ship. For the reasons I've listed, obviously, and I realized that this would be kind of going back into the production pipeline. And, I often said, at one point last year, I was out of the production pipeline, and then, something happened, and I had to get this ship or that ship. But I think that the Nautilus is a ship that definitely has an interesting future. I like the way that it's designed. It's a very simple design. It isn't overly complicated. It isn't beholden to shape language. It has a very logical layout about it. I like that. And in a weird way, it almost kind of looks like a little mini Star Destroyer. I mean, on the visual side, that's not a detractor. So I think that ultimately, as far as capital ships, combat ships go, I think that the Nautilus is going to be my finish line for right now. That is the way that I'm feeling currently. So even though it is not something that is currently on the pipeline and something that is obviously going to be some time away, this is kind of where I feel that I'm going to be going as far as capital ships are. And we'll talk about that in a separate video in the future, but yeah, that is probably the one thing that I am going to be getting done apart from doing these videos this week, is moving from the Hammerhead into the Nautilus. Just kidding. They're never going to build it. So, no. And finally, the Avenger. Now, from the top end of the pricing spectrum down to the bottom end of the pricing spectrum, though, when I say that, I do not mean that as any kind of indictment of the ship itself. The Avenger has been perpetually a part of Star Citizen since the very beginning. The Avenger has remained just an excellent starter ship. And, as we're heading over here in the hangar towards the Avengers, it has to be said that the Avengers are just damn fine ships. They're great ships. And so if you're looking to get into Star Citizen and you're looking for a decent starter ship, something like the Avenger Titan is an excellent starter ship. Now, when I talk about ships like the Sabre and stuff like that, I am kind of bunching them all up, the Vanguard, all that. I'm bunching them all up together because I've made many videos dealing with the individual ships. But the Avengers are they're absolutely solid ships. They're fantastic ships. They always have been good ships. Are they the best at combat? No, they're not the best at combat, but they're solid. And, sometimes a good middle-of-the-road ship is all that you really need, and the Avenger is that. Whether you're talking about this one, the Warlock, which has the EMP and unfortunately no cargo space, to the multitude of other models, the Avenger has always been an excellent starship. And I don't think that, if you're getting into Star Citizen, I don't think that you really can go wrong picking an Avenger as your starting ship. I mean, this is the Stalker model, which of course has all the the little pods for carrying all the bounties that you are going to capture at some point, hopefully, in the future of the game. And over here, we're moving over towards the Titan and the, the Titan with a paint job model. There's so many ships in Star Citizen, even I have trouble keeping them all straight nowadays. But whatever you end up getting, if you're getting an Avenger, you're getting a good ship. You are getting a good ship, and that is something that oftentimes when you look at the dizzying array of possibilities within the Star Citizen universe, the fear of getting the ship that's, terrible or awful, that can be a real fear. A lot of people, whether, whatever game you're playing, sometimes you purchase something and you ultimately have buyer's regrets. You're like, wow, what a piece of crap. The Avenger has, in my mind, it has never been a piece of crap. It has never been the greatest ship, but it has always been a damn good ship. And with that, we come now to the end of Aegis. I'm going to probably have to do this one at 1080 because rendering it at 4K would be a nightmare. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.